I'm Emily, 32, lying in this hospital bed watching my life slip away. The cancer is winning, but that's not what hurts the most. My parents abandoned me when I needed them most, then suddenly reappeared when they heard about my inheritance from Grandma Eleanor. They thought they were so clever, bringing my entitled sister Jessica along for support. What they didn't know was that I'd already left a letter that would change everything. Before I tell you how I outsmarted the people who were supposed to, love me unconditionally, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up for yourself against family who tried to take advantage of you. Growing up in suburban Connecticut, I had what many would consider the picture-perfect American family. My father, Robert, was a successful investment banker who provided us with a beautiful 5-bedroom colonial home in an exclusive neighborhood. My mother, Linda, was the quintessential socialite, always hosting dinner parties and charity events that had more to do with maintaining appearances than actual charitable work. Then there was my younger sister, Jessica, 3 years my junior and the undisputed favorite child. From the moment she was born, it was clear that she held a special place in my parents' hearts that I would never occupy. Jessica was the pretty one, the social one, the one who embodied everything my parents valued: beauty, charm, and the ability to fit perfectly into their carefully curated world. I wasn't an unattractive child, but I was bookish and serious, from an early age. While Jessica took ballet and horseback riding lessons, I buried myself in science books and dreamed of becoming a doctor. My achievements in school were acknowledged with obligatory praise, but they never received the same enthusiastic celebration as Jessica's minor accomplishments. "Emily got straight A's again," my father would say with a cursory nod before turning to gush. "But did you see Jessica's performance in the school play? She stole the show." The pattern was established early and remained consistent throughout my childhood. Christmas mornings revealed the disparity in stark relief. Jessica's pile of presents towering over my modest collection. Birthday parties for Jessica were elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, while mine were small family dinners that my parents often seemed impatient to conclude. The one person who saw me, truly saw me, was my grandmother Eleanor. Mom's mother lived in a beautiful coastal property in Maine that had been in the family for generations. During summer visits, she would take me beachcombing while Jessica stayed behind with our parents. "You have a special mind, Emily," Grandma Eleanor would tell me as we examined tide pools teeming with life. "You see the world differently than your sister does. That's not better or worse, just different. But don't let anyone make you feel less valuable because of it." Those summers with Grandma were my salvation. The one time I felt fully accepted and appreciated. She encouraged my interest in medicine, buying me microscopes and anatomy books that my parents dismissed as morbid. When I declared at 12 that I wanted to become a doctor, my parents exchanged glances. "Medicine is such a demanding field. Honey?" my mother said. "Maybe something more suitable for a family life would be better." The subtext was clear. They expected me to marry well and produce grandchildren, not pursue a demanding career. But Grandma Eleanor squeezed my hand under the table and later slipped me a book about famous women in medicine. When it came time for college, I had maintained a perfect GPA and earned a partial scholarship to Brown University. My parents contributed to my tuition, but made it clear it was a financial strain, despite paying full freight for Jessica's equestrian lessons and designer wardrobe. "We're just trying to be fair to both our girls," my father explained when I questioned the disparity. The first major betrayal came at my college graduation. I was graduating summa cum laude with a degree in biology, having been accepted to Harvard Medical School with a prestigious scholarship. My parents had promised to attend, but 3 days before the ceremony, my mother called. "Emily, I'm so sorry, but we won't be able to make it. Jessica has her regional dance competition that weekend, and you know how important this is for her future. You understand, right? You've always been our independent one." I sat alone in my dorm room, the graduation gown hanging on my closet door, and felt the familiar ache of being secondary. Only Grandma Eleanor showed up, proudly taking photos and treating me to a celebratory dinner. "Your achievements are extraordinary, Emily," she said, her eyes brimming with pride. "Never forget that, even when others fail to recognize it." That night, she gave me a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant in the shape of a caduceus, the symbol of medicine. "This was your great-grandmother's. She wanted to be a doctor too, but in her time, women weren't allowed. She would be so proud to see you carrying on the dream she couldn't fulfill." I wore that necklace through medical school, through grueling 30-hour shifts as a resident, and eventually as I established my practice as an oncologist in Boston. I built a life separate from my family, calling on holidays and visiting occasionally, but maintaining emotional distance as a form of self-protection. Jessica, meanwhile, dropped out of college after 2 years to find herself, cycling through various career aspirations that my parents funded without question. When she decided to open a boutique yoga studio that failed within a year, they covered her debts. When she wanted to travel through Europe to gain perspective, they paid for 6 months of luxury accommodations. I watched from the sidelines, focusing on my own success, telling myself that I didn't need their approval or support. I had patients who respected me, colleagues who valued my expertise, and the satisfaction of knowing I had achieved everything through my own determination. But deep down, the little girl who just wanted her parents to show up at her graduation still lived inside me, hoping that someday they would see my worth. The irony wasn't lost on me when I received my diagnosis. As an oncologist, I had delivered the devastating news to countless patients, holding their hands and guiding them through treatment options. Now, at 29, I sat on the other side of the desk, listening to my colleague and friend Dr. Sarah Chen explain that I had stage 3 lymphoma. "The good news is that we caught it before it spread further," Sarah said, her professional demeanor tinged with personal concern. "The treatment protocol has excellent outcomes for someone your age and overall health." I nodded, already mentally calculating survival rates and treatment options. "Let's start aggressive chemotherapy as soon as possible," I said, my doctor brain taking over to protect my human heart from the full impact of the news. That evening, I called my parents. I had rehearsed what I would say, trying to strike a balance between clinical detachment and appropriate emotion. My mother answered on the 4th ring, the sounds of a dinner party audible in the background. "Emily, what a surprise. We're just hosting the Andersons for dinner. Can I call you back?" "Tomorrow?" "Mom, I've been diagnosed with lymphoma. Stage 3. I'm starting treatment next week." There was a pause, then my mother's voice dropped to a whisper. "Oh my goodness. Are you sure? Maybe you should get a second opinion." "Mom, I'm an oncologist. I've reviewed the scans myself. It's definitely cancer." "Well, I'm sure you'll be fine. You've always been so strong. Listen, can we talk about this tomorrow? The soufflé is about to come out of the oven." That conversation set the tone for what would follow. My parents expressed appropriate concern but maintained a strange distance, as if my illness was an inconvenience rather than a life-threatening condition. When I mentioned that my first chemotherapy session was scheduled, my father explained that they couldn't possibly come because Jessica had just announced her engagement to Bradley, a real estate developer from a good family, and they were busy planning an engagement party. "You understand, don't you, Emily? This is such an important time for your sister. We'll try to visit you soon, though." I went to my first chemotherapy session alone. The nurses were kind, but as I watched other patients with family members beside them, I felt the absence of my own family like a physical pain. I texted Jessica to congratulate her on her engagement, receiving a string of excited emojis in return, and a promise to catch up soon that never materialized. As the weeks of treatment turned into months, my parents' excuses grew more elaborate. There was the engagement party, then wedding venue tours, then Jessica's meltdown over floral arrangements that required my mother's full attention. My father was busy with important clients and couldn't get away. Meanwhile, my body betrayed me further. My hair fell out in clumps, my weight dropped dramatically, and the constant nausea became my unwelcome companion. The treatments that were meant to save me often made me feel like they might kill me first. I developed neutropenia, a dangerous condition where the chemotherapy destroyed too many of my white blood cells, leaving me vulnerable to infection. During one particularly difficult hospitalization for an infection, I called my mother in tears. "Mom, I'm really scared. The doctors are concerned about sepsis and I'm alone here." "Oh, Emily," she sighed. "Jessica is having a crisis with her wedding dress. The designer made the wrong neckline and she's absolutely devastated. I just can't leave her right now." It was Grandma Eleanor who came to my rescue, taking a train from Maine despite her arthritis that made travel difficult. She stayed in a hotel near the hospital and visited me every day, bringing homemade soup that I could barely eat but appreciated deeply. "Your parents don't understand what really matters," she said one afternoon, her lined face tight with disappointment in her own daughter. "They've always been seduced by appearances rather than substance." My colleagues at the hospital became my surrogate family. Dr. Sarah coordinated my care personally, and the nurses treated me with extra tenderness, knowing I was fighting this battle largely alone. The other oncologists in my practice covered my patients without complaint and sent me encouraging messages. 6 months into my treatment, during a brief period when I was feeling stronger, my mother called with an unexpected question. "Emily, I know this is a difficult time, but your father and I were wondering about your financial situation. With you being out of work for treatment, are you managing your mortgage payments? And do you have a life insurance policy?" The question stunned me into silence. Not, "How are you feeling?" or "What can we do to help?" but essentially, "Are your finances in order if you die?" "I'm fine financially," I said coldly. "I have disability insurance through the hospital and substantial savings." "That's good to hear," my mother replied, sounding relieved. "You know we would help if we could, but with Jessica's wedding costing so much." It was at that moment that I began to see my family with absolute clarity, without the filter of hope and wishful thinking that had colored my perception for years. They weren't absent because they couldn't face my illness. They were absent because other things were more important to them. Jessica's wedding mattered. My cancer did not. The realization should have crushed me, but instead, it was oddly liberating. I stopped waiting for my parents to show up. I stopped making excuses for them to my friends and colleagues. I stopped pretending we were a normal family going through a difficult time. "I'm essentially an orphan with living parents," I told my therapist during one session. "The sooner I accept that, the sooner I can focus all my energy on healing." As my treatment progressed, Grandma Eleanor visited as often as her health permitted. During one visit, she seemed particularly tired. Her usual vibrancy dimmed. "Are you feeling all right, Grandma?" I asked, concerned by the dark circles under her eyes. "Just getting old, dear," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Nothing for you to worry about. You focus on getting better." What I didn't know then was that Grandma was hiding her own diagnosis, not wanting to burden me with additional worry. It was a secret that would change everything in the months to come. After 8 grueling months of chemotherapy and radiation, my doctors delivered the news I had been praying for. I was in remission. The cancer had responded to treatment, and while I would need regular monitoring, I could begin rebuilding my life. I celebrated quietly with my hospital family, accepting their hugs and well wishes with tears of gratitude. The first person I called was Grandma Eleanor. When she didn't answer, I assumed she was gardening or taking one of her beach walks. I left an excited message about my remission and asked her to call me back. 3 hours later, my phone rang, with a Maine area code, but it wasn't my grandmother's voice I heard. "Is this Emily Winters?" a male voice asked. "Yes, this is she." "Ms. Winters, this is Officer Barrett with the Cape Elizabeth Police Department. I'm sorry to inform you that your grandmother, Eleanor Caldwell, was found deceased in her home this morning by a neighbor. The world tilted on its axis. Just when I had received a new lease on life, the person who had supported me through my darkest hours was gone. The officer explained that it appeared to be natural causes, that she had passed peacefully in her sleep. Later, I would learn that Grandma had been diagnosed with advanced heart failure months earlier, but had kept it secret from everyone, not wanting to distract from my cancer battle. I made the necessary arrangements through tears, booking a flight to Maine and notifying family members. My parents expressed appropriate shock and sadness, promising to meet me at Grandma's house the following day. For once, they didn't have an excuse not to come. Arriving at the coastal property brought a flood of memories: summers collecting seashells, late-night conversations on the porch swing, Grandma's unwavering belief in me. The house itself was a character from my childhood, a gracious Victorian, overlooking the Atlantic, with gingerbread trim and a widow's walk where Grandma and I had stargazed on clear nights. The property included 5 acres of prime oceanfront land, a guest cottage, and a boathouse. It was not only a beloved family home, but also an extremely valuable piece of real estate. My parents and Jessica arrived the next morning, appropriately, somber in black attire. My mother hugged me briefly, her perfume overwhelming my still sensitive system. "You look terrible, Emily," she said, stepping back to examine my thin frame and the knit cap covering my still-growing hair. "Is the cancer back?" "No, Mom. I'm in remission. I'm grieving for Grandma the same as you." Jessica gave me an awkward side hug, careful not to get too close, as if my cancer might be contagious. "This house is still amazing," she commented, looking around the entry hall with appreciative eyes. "I forgot how gorgeous the ocean views are." My father was more direct. "Has the attorney been in touch about the will?" he asked while loosening his tie. The reading of Grandma Eleanor's will was scheduled for the following day. We gathered in the library of her home, where the family attorney, Mr. Sullivan, had set up a small table with his documents. He was a kind older gentleman who had handled my grandmother's affairs for decades. "Before I begin," he said, "Eleanor asked me to give this to you, Emily." He handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a key with a tag that read simply, "For after." Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat and began reading the will. The contents were straightforward. After some small bequests to longtime employees and friends, the bulk of Eleanor's estate, including the main property, a substantial investment portfolio, and several other assets, was left to me. To my beloved granddaughter Emily, who embodies the qualities I value most: compassion, integrity, and perseverance, I leave my home and the majority of my estate. She alone has demonstrated the character to be a proper steward of the Caldwell legacy. The silence in the room was deafening. My mother's face flushed red, my father's jaw tightened, and Jessica stared at me with naked resentment. "There must be some mistake," my mother finally said. "Mother always intended for the property to stay in the family." "Emily is family," Mr. Sullivan pointed out gently. "You know what I mean," my mother snapped. "The property should be divided equally among all of us." Mr. Sullivan shook his head. Eleanor's wishes were very clear. She updated her will just 3 months ago and was of completely sound mind. As we left the attorney's office, my parents' behavior toward me underwent a dramatic shift. Suddenly, they were solicitous of my health, asking detailed questions about my treatment and prognosis. My father put his arm around me as we walked to our cars. "We should discuss what you plan to do with the property, Emily," he said in a tone I recognized from his business dealings. "Your mother has such emotional attachment to her childhood home. Perhaps we could work out an arrangement." Jessica was less subtle. "It's not fair that you get everything just because you had cancer and played the sympathy card with Grandma." I was too emotionally exhausted to argue. I returned to Boston the next day with the key Grandma had left me and instructions from Mr. Sullivan to call him once I was ready to discuss the estate further. The property was mine, but I had no energy to think about it as I focused on recovering my strength after treatments. 2 weeks after returning home, I received devastating news during a follow-up scan. The cancer had returned, more aggressive than before. My doctors recommended a stem cell transplant as my best chance for survival, but the procedure was risky and would require weeks of hospitalization, followed by months of isolation due to my compromised immune system. As I grappled with this setback, my phone began ringing with unprecedented frequency. My parents called daily, their conversations a strange mix of health inquiries and casual mentions of the main property. "We're so concerned about you going through this transplant alone," my mother said. "Perhaps you should come stay with us afterward. We could help take care of the main property too, relieve you of that burden during your recovery." Jessica began texting me regularly, suddenly, interested in reconnecting after years of minimal contact. She even suggested visiting me in the hospital to discuss Grandma's house and memories of our summers there. The transparency of their motivations was both painful and clarifying. Now that I had something they wanted, I mattered. The property that had been in our family for generations, that held so many precious memories of the one person who had truly loved me unconditionally, had transformed me from an inconvenient cancer patient to a valuable asset in their eyes. As my health deteriorated rapidly, their behavior became increasingly desperate. My father began talking about investment opportunities that could maximize the value of Grandma's estate. My mother spoke nostalgically about childhood memories in the house, suggesting it should stay with the person who appreciated it most, meaning herself, of course. I used the key Grandma had given me through Mr. Sullivan. It opened a small safe in her bedroom closet, containing a letter addressed to me in her familiar handwriting. The letter revealed that she had known about her heart condition for months, but had kept it secret to avoid burdening me during my treatment. She explained her decision to leave everything to me. "I've watched how you've faced this terrible illness with grace and courage, while my own daughter and her husband couldn't be bothered to support you. They've shown their true colors, Emily. And I can't in good conscience leave my legacy to people with such shallow values. You understand what really matters in this life. I trust you to use what I'm leaving you in a way that reflects those values." As I read her words, tears streaming down my face, I felt both validated and heartbroken. Grandma had seen everything clearly, had recognized the painful truth about my family that I had spent years trying to deny. In her final act, she had chosen to acknowledge that truth and ensure her legacy would not be squandered by people who had never appreciated what really mattered. The cancer was progressing rapidly, and I knew my time was limited. But Grandma's letter had given me something powerful, clarity of purpose for whatever time I had left. My condition deteriorated quickly following the second diagnosis. The aggressive form of lymphoma invaded my body with ruthless efficiency, and I was hospitalized within weeks. The stem cell transplant was scheduled, but my doctors were honest about the diminishing odds of success. During this time, my parents' visits increased dramatically in frequency, but decreased in duration. They would appear in my hospital room, my mother clutching a small bouquet of flowers from the hospital gift shop, my father checking his watch every few minutes. Their conversations followed a predictable pattern: brief inquiries about my health, followed by increasingly transparent questions about the main property. "Have you thought about what you want to do with Grandma's house?" my mother asked during one visit, barely 5 minutes after arriving. "It needs regular maintenance, you know. The salt air is so hard on the exterior." "I'm a little preoccupied with staying alive, Mom," I replied, too exhausted to mask my frustration. "Of course, dear, but it's important to plan ahead," she continued, undeterred. "Your father and I could oversee the property management. We could even stay there occasionally to make sure everything is properly maintained." My father nodded enthusiastically. "It's a significant asset, Emily. You need to protect its value." One afternoon, I awoke from a medication-induced nap to hear my parents talking in the corner of my hospital room, assuming I was still asleep. "How long did the doctors say?" my father asked in a hushed tone. "Without the transplant, maybe 2 months. With it, it's still uncertain," my mother replied. "We need to talk to her about signing over at least partial ownership before—" My father's voice trailed off. "I know," my mother said. "Once the property transfers after she's gone, the taxes will be much higher. It would be better if she gifted it to us now." I kept my eyes closed, my heart breaking into even smaller pieces. They weren't there because they loved me or wanted to support me through my final months. They were there to secure Grandma's property before I died. Jessica visited the following day, alone for the first time. She sat awkwardly in the visitor's chair, scrolling through her phone more than looking at me. After some stilted small talk about her wedding plans, she got to the point. "Emily, I think you should do the right thing with Grandma's property," she said, setting her phone down. "Mom is really hurt that Grandma overlooked her in the will. It's tearing the family apart." "What family?" I asked quietly. "The one that couldn't be bothered to show up for a single chemotherapy session? The one that prioritized wedding flowers over my cancer treatment?" Jessica's face hardened. "That's not fair. We all have our own lives. You chose to live far away and be independent. You can't blame us for respecting that independence." "Independence wasn't a choice, Jessica. It was survival. And now that I have something you all want, suddenly you're concerned about family unity?" "Look," Jessica said, dropping all pretense. "You're dying. It's awful and I'm sorry, but it's reality. You don't need the house or the money. We do. Mom deserves her childhood home, and I'm starting a family with Bradley. That money could secure our future." The brutal honesty was almost refreshing after months of manipulation. I looked at my sister, beautiful, entitled, and utterly lacking in empathy, and felt a strange sense of pity. "I'll think about it," I said, too tired to argue further. Jessica left shortly after, and I didn't hear from my family for 3 days. During that time, my condition worsened significantly. The doctors discovered that the cancer had spread to my central nervous system, making the planned stem cell transplant futile. I was moved to a private room where the focus shifted from curative treatment to pain management. When my parents finally returned, I confronted them directly. "I overheard your conversation about wanting me to sign over Grandma's property before I die to avoid inheritance taxes," I said as they settled into their chairs. "Is that really why you've been visiting? To secure your inheritance?" My father had the decency to look embarrassed, but my mother became defensive. "That's a terrible accusation, Emily. We're here because we love you." "When was the last time either of you asked how I'm feeling, or stayed with me through a treatment, or just held my hand because I'm scared?" The silence was damning. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "And don't come back unless it's actually about me, not what you think you can get from me." My father stood up immediately. "You're not thinking clearly, Emily. The medications are affecting your judgment." My mother's reaction was colder. "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? By turning your back on family, when we're trying to help." "You've never helped me," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "Not once during this entire nightmare. Please leave." They departed in a huff of indignation, my father muttering about ungrateful children as they walked out the door. I sobbed until a nurse named Maria came in to check my vitals, her kind, face creased with concern. "Family troubles?" she asked gently, adjusting my IV. "They're not family," I responded through tears. "Not really." Maria became my constant companion in the days that followed. She worked the night shift and would often spend her breaks sitting with me, sharing stories about her 3 children, or just providing silent companionship. She brought me homemade arroz con pollo when my appetite briefly returned, and held cool cloths to my forehead when the fever spiked. "My eldest son was diagnosed with leukemia when he was 12, she told me one night. He's 22 now, in college. During his treatment, our church community brought us meals for 6 months straight. Not everyone has blood family they can depend on, but family comes in many forms." As my condition deteriorated rapidly, my parents didn't return my calls. I left increasingly desperate messages as the pain intensified, and the reality of my imminent death became undeniable. "Mom, the doctors say I don't have much time. Please come. I don't want to die alone." "Dad, I know we disagreed, but please, I'm scared." The only responses were brief texts. "Thinking of you" from my mother and "in meetings all day" from my father. The property had been their only real interest, and once they realized I wouldn't sign it over, they abandoned me completely. Maria found me sobbing one evening, clutching my phone with no new messages. "They're not coming, are they?" I asked, through tears. She took my hand in hers. "I'm here, Emily. You are not alone." It was in that moment of utter abandonment by those who should have loved me most that I found a strange kind of strength. If these were to be my final days, I would not spend them hoping for the impossible or grieving for the family I never truly had. Instead, I would ensure that Grandma Eleanor's legacy, and my own, would serve a greater purpose. Through the fog of pain medication and growing weakness, a plan began to form. I may have been dying, but I wasn't dead yet, and I still had one final act of agency left. The next morning, I asked Maria to help me contact Mr. Sullivan, my grandmother's attorney. Though it was against hospital protocol, she brought me her personal tablet and helped me make the video call. Mr. Sullivan's concerned face filled the screen, his eyes widening slightly at my diminished appearance. "Emily, I've been trying to reach you. Your mother called my office several times asking about the process for contesting the will." "That sounds like her," I said with a weak smile. "Mr. Sullivan, I need your help. I don't have much time left, and I want to make sure Grandma's legacy is protected." He nodded solemnly. "Whatever you need, I can come to Boston tomorrow." True to his word, Mr. Sullivan arrived the following afternoon with all the necessary paperwork. Maria had arranged for a private conference room where we could speak undisturbed, and a hospital social worker served as one witness while Maria volunteered as the second. "I want to create a foundation," I explained to Mr. Sullivan, "the Eleanor Caldwell Foundation for Cancer Patients Without Family Support. The main property should be sold, and the proceeds, along with Grandma's investments, will fund the foundation." Mr. Sullivan took detailed notes as I outlined my vision. A foundation that would provide financial assistance to cancer patients who lacked family support, covering everything from medical bills to household help, transportation to treatments, and even vacation respites at healing retreats. "I want to leave a small inheritance to my parents and Jessica," I added. "Just enough that they can't contest the will on grounds of being completely overlooked, but not enough to satisfy their greed." "A wise precaution," Mr. Sullivan agreed. "Eleanor taught you well." As he prepared the legal documents, I found myself reflecting on a conversation I'd had with my grandmother during one of her last visits before her death. "People show you who they truly are in crisis," she had told me, her weathered hand resting on mine. "Not who they pretend to be when times are good, but who they actually are when things fall apart. Pay attention to that, Emily. It's the most valuable information you'll ever receive about someone." She had been right. My illness had revealed the truth about my family in ways that couldn't be denied or explained away. It was painful knowledge, but also clarifying. It allowed me to make decisions without the fog of false hope or misplaced loyalty. While Mr. Sullivan worked on the legal arrangements, I began writing the letter that would be read after my death. The letter that would ensure my truth was heard, even when my voice was gone. "My name is Emily Winters," I began, "and by the time this letter is read, I will have died from lymphoma at the age of 32. This is the story of how my family abandoned me in my greatest time of need, then returned only when they thought there was something to gain. I detailed the journey of my illness chronologically, documenting each instance when my parents chose Jessica's wedding plans over my cancer treatments, when they asked about my finances instead of my well-being, when they discussed inheritance, taxes while thinking I was asleep. I described overhearing them talk about what they would do with the property when she's gone, and Jessica's direct suggestion that I sign over my inheritance because I was dying anyway. Writing the letter was emotionally exhausting, but also strangely healing. There was power in telling my unvarnished truth, in refusing to perpetuate the fiction of a loving family that had never existed. I wasn't writing from a place of vengeance, but of justice. For myself, for Grandma Eleanor, and for others who might find themselves similarly abandoned. I don't write this letter to punish my family, I concluded, but to explain why I've made the choices reflected in my will. The Eleanor Caldwell Foundation will provide support to cancer patients who, like me, face their illness without family by their side. My grandmother saw people for who they truly were and made her choices accordingly. I am following her example. Mr. Sullivan returned the next day with finalized documents. My hands shook as I signed page after page, the effort leaving me exhausted, but satisfied. The foundation was established, the trustees appointed, with Maria as one of the board members, and my letter officially notarized to be read at the execution of my will. "Is there anything else you need, Emily?" Mr. Sullivan asked gently after all the papers were signed. "Just one thing," I replied. "When they come, and they will come once they hear I'm gone, I want you to make sure they hear every word of that letter. Not in private, but in front of the foundation board members, the hospital staff who actually cared for me, and anyone else who was truly there for me at the end. I give you my word," he promised. As Mr. Sullivan packed up his briefcase, I reached for the caduceus necklace that Grandma Eleanor had given me years ago at my college graduation. I had worn it through every treatment, every setback, every small victory in my battle with cancer. "Would you give this to Maria after I'm gone?" I asked, holding out the delicate gold chain. "She's been more family to me in these last weeks than my blood relatives have been my entire life." That night, as I lay in my hospital bed watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. My parents and Jessica might have abandoned me, but I was not ending my life alone. I had found true family in unexpected places, in Maria's gentle care, in my colleagues' unwavering support, in the memory of Grandma Eleanor's unconditional love. My body was failing, but I had succeeded in the thing that mattered most, ensuring that the pain of my abandonment would be transformed into support for others facing similar circumstances. The inheritance that my family had coveted so desperately would serve a purpose far greater than their selfish desires. As my condition worsened over the following days, my parents' text messages continued to be perfunctory and rare. They didn't know that I had already made all the necessary arrangements, that their inheritance dreams had been irrevocably altered. They were waiting for my death to claim what they believed would be theirs, unaware that I had already determined a different fate for Grandma's legacy. In my final act of agency, I had reclaimed my narrative and created meaning from suffering. The letter was written, the foundation established, the truth secured. Whatever came next, I was ready. The final days of my life unfolded with surprising gentleness. As my body surrendered to the cancer that had waged war within me for so long, I was moved to the hospice wing of the hospital. The room was spacious and peaceful, with large windows, overlooking a flowering garden where birds visited throughout the day. My medical team transitioned from fighting for my survival to ensuring my comfort. Dr. Sarah visited daily, often sitting silently beside me, her presence a comfort when words were unnecessary. The hospital chaplain came to offer spiritual support, respecting my personal beliefs while providing a compassionate ear for my reflections on life and what might come after. But it was Maria who became my constant guardian. Though not officially, assigned to my care in hospice, she visited before and after her shifts, sometimes bringing small treats that I could no longer eat, but appreciated nonetheless. She read to me when my vision began to blur. Everything from poetry to trashy celebrity magazines that made me laugh despite my condition. "My son asked about you today," she told me one afternoon. "He remembers what it was like, being sick. He's praying for you." "Tell him thank you," I whispered, my voice growing weaker by the day. "And thank you, Maria, for being here when no one else was." She squeezed my hand. "Family isn't always blood, Emily." In these final days, my parents' communication dwindled to occasional text messages, usually asking vague questions about my condition, but never offering to visit. Jessica stopped contacting me entirely after our confrontation. The property and inheritance remained their primary concern, evident in my father's awkward message asking if I had made any decisions about Grandma's house, even as I was actively dying. I didn't respond. There seemed no point in continuing the charade of family connection when the truth had been so painfully established. Instead, I focused on finding meaning in my remaining time, dictating final messages to friends and colleagues who had supported me throughout my illness. On my final morning, I woke to unusual clarity, what the hospice nurses called terminal lucidity, a brief window of awareness that sometimes comes before the end. I asked Maria, who had stayed overnight in the recliner beside my bed, to help me to the window. Together, we watched the sunrise paint the sky in brilliant hues of orange and gold. "It's beautiful," I murmured, leaning heavily against her sturdy frame. "Yes, it is," she agreed, her arms secure around my waist. "I'm not afraid anymore," I told her. "Everything that needed to be done is done." She helped me back to bed, adjusting pillows and smoothing blankets with maternal tenderness. "Is there anything you need, Emily?" I shook my head, suddenly too tired to speak. The brief energy of lucidity was fading, replaced by a profound weariness that seemed to reach into my bones. Maria seemed to understand without words, sitting beside me and holding my hand as my breathing grew more labored. The room filled with soft morning light as I drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain that had been my constant companion for months seemed distant now, replaced by a strange floating sensation. I thought of Grandma Eleanor, of summers spent collecting shells along the Maine coastline, of her unwavering belief in me when no one else had seen my worth. "I'm keeping my promise, Grandma," I whispered, unsure if the words were actually spoken or merely thought. Maria's voice came to me as if from a great distance. "It's okay to let go, Emily. You've done everything you needed to do. It's okay to rest now." With her permission, I surrendered to the weightless feeling that had been tugging at me. My last conscious awareness was of Maria's hand in mine and the golden sunlight warming my face. I died at 8:47 that morning, peacefully and without pain, with Maria bearing witness to my passing with dignity and grace. What happened after my death was related to me later by Mr. Sullivan, who kept his promise to honor my final wishes. My parents and Jessica arrived at the hospital nearly 3 hours after I had passed, having received the call from the hospital administration. They came directly from the airport, Jessica still wearing sunglasses as if she'd been on vacation. According to the charge nurse who observed their arrival, they spent less than 10 minutes in my room, my mother shedding appropriate tears while my father awkwardly patted her shoulder. Jessica remained in the doorway, not approaching my body. Their chief concern, expressed almost immediately upon exiting my room, was contacting Mr. Sullivan about next steps regarding the estate. The nurse, who had cared for me during my final weeks and knew my story, later described their behavior as performing grief rather than experiencing it. They asked detailed questions about my personal effects, specifically whether I had kept any legal documents or keys in my hospital room. My father called Mr. Sullivan from the hospital corridor, not bothering to lower his voice as he expressed urgency about settling Emily's affairs and transferring the property titles. He seemed genuinely shocked when Mr. Sullivan informed him that there would be a formal reading of the will in 3 days' time, and that all beneficiaries and interested parties were required to attend in person. "But we're the only family," my father protested. "Surely this can be handled more efficiently." Mr. Sullivan held firm, explaining that the execution of my estate was to be conducted exactly as I had specified in my legal documents. My parents had no choice but to comply if they wanted any chance at receiving what they believed would be a substantial inheritance. In the days between my death and the reading of the will, my parents made a show of arranging a memorial service, though they opted for immediate cremation without a viewing. They contacted my colleagues at the hospital with questions about my work friends who might attend, clearly unfamiliar with the people who had been my true support system. They told relatives and acquaintances elaborate stories about how they had been by my side throughout my illness, how they had done everything possible to support me through treatment. They described tearful bedside vigils that had never occurred, and conversations about my legacy that existed only in their imagination. Jessica posted a black and white photo of us as children on her social media accounts, with a lengthy caption about sisterly bonds and the tragedy of cancer, garnering hundreds of sympathetic comments from people who knew nothing of our actual relationship. She changed her profile picture to one of us together at her engagement party, the last family event I had attended before becoming too ill to socialize. The narrative they constructed bore no resemblance to the reality I had experienced, but they had always excelled at maintaining appearances. In death, as in life, I was being shaped into whatever version of a daughter and sister best served their needs at the moment. What they didn't know was that the truth was preserved in my letter, and that their carefully constructed fiction was about to crumble in the most public way possible. 3 days after my death, a diverse group gathered at Mr. Sullivan's office for the reading of my will. My parents and Jessica arrived early, dressed in tasteful black attire, their expressions appropriately solemn. They seemed confused by the presence of others in the waiting room. Maria in her day-off clothes rather than scrubs, Dr. Sarah still wearing her hospital ID badge, several nurses from the oncology ward, and a group of professionally dressed individuals they didn't recognize. "Who are all these people?" my mother whispered to my father loudly enough to be overheard. "Why would they be involved in a family matter?" Mr. Sullivan emerged from his office precisely at 2 o'clock, greeting everyone with somber professionalism. "Thank you all for coming. We'll be using the conference room for the reading of Emily Winter's last will and testament, as there are quite a few of us today." My parents exchanged glances as they followed him into a large room with a polished oak table. Nameplates had been set at designated seats, and my mother frowned at the arrangement that separated her from my father and Jessica. "Before we begin," Mr. Sullivan announced once everyone was seated, "I want to explain that this gathering is exactly as Emily requested. She was very specific about who should be present and how the proceedings should unfold." He opened a leather portfolio and removed a sealed envelope. "Emily left a letter to be read before the distribution of her assets is discussed. She was adamant that everyone hear her words exactly as she wrote them." My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Is this really necessary? We're all grieving, and administrative details could surely be handled more privately." "This is not an administrative detail, Mrs. Winters," Mr. Sullivan replied firmly. "This is your daughter's final communication, and I am bound by professional ethics and personal promise to ensure it is delivered as she intended." He opened the envelope and began to read my letter aloud, his clear voice carrying every word I had written in my final days. I had begun with simple facts about my diagnosis and treatment, establishing the timeline of my illness without editorial comment. As Mr. Sullivan read about my parents' absence during chemotherapy, their prioritization of Jessica's wedding plans, and their failure to visit during critical hospitalizations, my mother's face flushed crimson. "This is outrageous," she interrupted. Emily was clearly not in her right mind when she wrote this. The medications affected her perception. "Mrs. Winters," Mr. Sullivan said calmly, "I personally witnessed Emily's mental clarity when this letter was written and notarized. She was lucid and determined. Now, please allow me to continue." The letter proceeded to detail the conversations I had overheard about inheritance taxes, my parents' transparent attempts to secure the property before my death, and Jessica's blunt statement that I should sign over my inheritance because I was dying anyway. With each revelation, the hospital staff who had witnessed my abandonment nodded in somber confirmation. "To be clear," my letter continued, "I don't write this from a place of bitterness or revenge, but from a desire for truth. My grandmother Eleanor taught me to see people for who they truly are, not who I wished them to be. In honor of her wisdom and her legacy, I have made the following decisions regarding her estate." Mr. Sullivan paused before continuing with the terms of my will. "The coastal property in Maine is to be sold, with proceeds going to the newly established Eleanor Caldwell Foundation for Cancer Patients Without Family Support. Likewise, all investment accounts, securities, and additional assets inherited from Eleanor Caldwell will transfer to this foundation, which has been legally established and has received 501c3 status." My father's face darkened as he began to grasp the implications. "What exactly does this mean?" "It means," Mr. Sullivan explained patiently, "that Emily has directed the bulk of her inheritance to charitable purposes rather than individual beneficiaries." He gestured to the professionally dressed strangers. "These individuals are the board, members of the new foundation, including several oncologists, social workers, and patient advocates. Maria Gonzalez, who cared for Emily in her final days, has been named as a board member as well, in recognition of her compassion and support." My mother gripped the edge of the table. "This can't be legal. She was coerced by these hospital people when she was vulnerable." "I assure you, Mrs. Winters, everything was done with meticulous legal attention," Mr. Sullivan replied. "Emily consulted with me extensively, and all documents were properly witnessed and notarized." He continued reading from my will. "To my parents, Robert and Linda Winters, I leave the sum of $5,000 each. To my sister, Jessica Winters, I leave the sum of $5,000. These bequests are made not out of affection or obligation, but to establish legal standing for my will and to prevent claims of unintentional oversight." Jessica stood up abruptly. $5,000? That's insulting. Grandma's property is worth millions. Which will now help countless cancer patients who, like your sister, face their illness without family support, Dr. Sarah said quietly, from across the table. "This is absurd," my father sputtered. "We'll contest this will immediately. Emily was clearly not of sound mind." "You're welcome to try," Mr. Sullivan said, his tone suggesting the futility of such efforts. "However, I should inform you that Emily anticipated this reaction. She instructed me to offer you this choice. Accept the terms of the will as written, or the foundation will create a public scholarship in Emily's name that will include the full text of her letter detailing your abandonment during her illness." The threat of public exposure silenced my family momentarily. My parents had always prioritized their social standing and reputation above all else. "In addition," Mr. Sullivan continued, "Emily left specific instructions regarding her personal effects. Her medical books are donated to the hospital library. Her caduceus necklace, a gift from Eleanor Caldwell, is bequeathed to Maria Gonzalez with gratitude for her compassionate care." He reached into his pocket and handed the delicate gold necklace to Maria, who accepted it with tears streaming down her face. "This is outrageous," Jessica suddenly exploded. "Emily gets cancer and everyone treats her like some kind of saint. What about everything Mom and Dad did for her over the years? College tuition, helping with med school applications." "She was always the difficult one," always so independent and judgmental. We couldn't read her mind about what she wanted during her illness. She didn't want you to read her mind, Jessica, Maria said softly. She just wanted you to show up, to sit with her during chemo, to call regularly, to care about her as a person, not as an inconvenience or a source of inheritance. You have no right to judge our family, my mother snapped. You were just her nurse. I was the person holding her hand when she died, Maria replied, her dignity unshaken. Where were you? The room fell silent at this simple question. My parents had no answer that wouldn't reveal the truth of their absence. Mr. Sullivan cleared his throat and continued with the final portion of my letter. I hope that the foundation created from Eleanor's legacy will provide comfort and practical support to those facing cancer alone. True family isn't always defined by blood, but by who shows up when it matters most. To those who showed up for me, my medical team, the nursing staff, and especially Maria, thank you for being the family I chose at the end. And to those who share my experience of abandonment during illness, know that you are not alone, that your worth is not determined by others' inability to recognize it, and that your life has meaning beyond what anyone else assigns to it. As Mr. Sullivan folded the letter, my father stood up, tugging at my mother's arm. This is a waste of time. Our lawyer will be in touch. They gathered their belongings, Jessica following in their wake, and left without further comment. Their departure seemed to lighten the atmosphere in the room, as if a heavy weight had been lifted. The Foundation board members introduced themselves properly then, explaining their roles and their vision for implementing my wishes. The oncology ward nurses shared stories about my determination throughout treatment and my concern for other patients even as my own condition worsened. Maria spoke of our late-night conversations and my clarity of purpose in my final days. A year after my death, the Eleanor Caldwell Foundation had already provided support to over 50 cancer patients without family support. The main property sold for a substantial sum that, combined with Grandma's investments, created an endowment ensuring the foundation's work could continue indefinitely. My parents did consult an attorney about contesting the will, but ultimately declined to pursue legal action when faced with the potential public relations disaster. They told friends and acquaintances that they had respected Emily's wishes regarding her inheritance, recasting their compliance as parental support rather than forced acceptance. Maria wore the caduceus necklace during her shifts at the hospital, often telling patients about the doctor who had faced cancer with courage and turned her painful experience into help for others. She became the heart of the foundation, personally visiting recipients and ensuring that no one faced their cancer journey feeling as abandoned as I had. In the end, the legacy I left wasn't about money or property or even the foundation itself. It was about truth, the power of seeing people for who they truly are, and making choices based on that clarity rather than wishful thinking. It was about transforming personal pain into purposeful action that helped others. And it was about redefining family beyond blood relations to include those who show up, who hold your hand in darkness, who witness your suffering and remain present despite it. The letter I left behind wasn't an act of revenge, but of liberation. For myself, freed from the fiction of family that had never truly existed, and for others who might recognize their own stories in mine and find the courage to seek the support they deserve. What would you do if the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally only showed interest when there was something to gain? I hope my story helps anyone facing similar betrayal to stand firm in their truth and find their real family, the people who show up when it matters most. If my story resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to family members who didn't have your best interests at heart? What helped you find the strength to protect yourself? Don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth even when others fail to see it. Remember, the family you choose is often more valuable than the family you're born into. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always have people in your life who show up when it truly matters.